She served in many positions related to South Asia, including Deputy Assistant Secretary for South Asia, and from 1992 to 1995, Ambassador Schaefer was the U.S. Ambassador to Sri Lanka. Desi?
Thank you very much. I guess I'm batting cleanup. I appreciate the invitation. I am delighted to be on a panel with 5 people, all of whom I have worked with in different incarnations. Professor Arunachalam mentioned the cryogenic motors, and I believe that may have been the first professional conversation I ever had with him. I'm going to deal with a couple of issues that, strangely enough, I don't think actually have been addressed yet in our discussions. Broadly speaking, the opinions on the U.S.-India nuclear understanding fall into 3 categories: yes, no, and yes, but. What you heard from George and Joan is a version of yes, but. What you heard from Professor Arunachalam is a version of yes. You will also hear a version of yes from me, and I suspect that Brother Gallucci will give us a version of no. The issues that I want to talk about, if this Mike can decide it's not going to fight with us, are first of all where the U.S. relationship with India fits in the broader U.S. policy context, and secondly, what I consider to be an important element in the non-proliferation dimensions of the present proposal. First of all, the strategic dimension. From my point of view, the major context in which the U.S.-Indian relationship has undergone a revolution in the time since I've been at CSIS and since I left the government is the context of the changing geopolitics of Asia. The 2 big stories are the rise of China and the rise of India, slower, less dramatic, but nonetheless significant. The other story is the long funk in which Japan has found itself, in which it may be coming out of now, but which nonetheless has had a major impact on Japan's heft in the region. Right at the moment, the U.S., China, and India all have all those sets of bilateral relationships are reasonably good. Looking ahead, however, I believe that there is a strong likelihood that you're going to see significant differences in interests between the U.S. and China. This doesn't have to mean hostility, but there is likely to be a wariness there. Between the U.S. and India, I think our interests are likely to run more in parallel, and when you look at India and China, you're going to see, I think, a combination of rivalry and cooperation, and I can quote no less a personage than the Indian Foreign Secretary, who said he expected there to be both hostility and cooperation. Fundamentally, it's not in the U.S. interest, I think it's also not in the Indian interest, for any one power to dominate Asia. This leads to the U.S. interest in having strong and vigorous states around the rest of the continent without any implication that they need be hostile to China. I think this is the version of the counterweight to China argument that makes sense. It makes no sense for the U.S. to develop policy based on an assumption that countries in Asia are going to line up either with China or against it. No Asian country that I'm aware of is going to want to play that game, and I think that the U.S. recognizes that. But the idea that the other countries in Asia need to have the independence, the economic capacity, and the web of international relationships that permits them not to be entirely in China's shadow, that I think makes sense. And I think that was what led to the key statement on U.S. policy towards India, which appeared in a background briefing that many of you may have seen on the 25th of March. Much of the column inches in that background